And I've been playing with Paul since I was 15. We didn't break up because we weren't friends. We just broke up out of sheer boredom, you know. And boredom creates tension.
John Lennon wasn't a studio-crafted icon. He was forged by loss, rebellion, childhood trauma, and wounds that never truly healed. In the world of music, where most geniuses are remembered for their talent, Lennon is etched in history for his contradictions, both the angel of peace and the demon of revolt. He sang about love, yet once admitted to hitting his wife. He urged the world to imagine a future without war, then died in an assassination on his doorstep by a man who had asked for his autograph just hours earlier. With round glasses, messy hair, and a guitar in hand, he never tried to be perfect, only to be honest. Honest about the darkness in his soul, the scars of his childhood, fractured relationships, and dreams that were never whole. John Lennon wasn't a guiding light. He was someone who dared to walk through the dark and sing where no one else would. From a boy abandoned by his parents in Liverpool to the frontman of the Beatles, the band that reshaped Western culture. From a man America tried to deport to the voice behind the eternal ballad, Imagine. From a father who couldn't look his eldest son in the eye to a man who quietly baked bread for his youngest during 5 years in hiding. John Lennon didn't just exist. He fought to exist, to love, to forgive, and to be forgiven. And then, just when it seemed he had found himself, he was killed. Not out of political hatred, not by accident, but by a deranged fan who believed murdering him would wake up the world. Lennon's dream ended with 5 bullets, yet its echo has never faded. Because even in death, he remained the last dreamer who never stopped believing. How did a man who used drugs, abandoned his family, and helped break up a legendary band become the eternal voice of humanity's conscience? Join us on that journey, from the cries of a motherless boy to the final notes sung before he was shot. And if you've ever felt lost in a world full of judgment, perhaps you'll understand why humanity still hasn't let go of John Lennon. Early life. John Winston Lennon was born on October 9, 1940 in Liverpool, at a time when Britain was trembling under the bombings of World War II. From the very moment he entered the world, he didn't have a proper home. His father, Alfred Lennon, was a seaman, often away and eventually absent. His mother, Julia, was a free-spirited woman with no real intention of raising a child long-term. At age 5, John's parents suddenly reappeared at the same time and fought over custody. In a scarring and unforgettable scene, he was forced to choose between them. At first, the boy picked his father. But when his mother turned to leave, he broke into tears and ran after her. That was the first time John Lennon learned something brutal. No one truly wanted to keep him. And love, sometimes, can vanish in a single step. Soon after, Julia left John in the care of her older sister, Aunt Mimi Smith, at 251 Menlove Avenue. The small, tidy house was full of rules, with no rock music or laughter. Mimi was strict, hard-edged, and often reminded John that guitars won't get you anywhere. But it was there, in that emotionally muted space, that a lonely boy began playing music to fill the void no one wanted to hear. His mother remained a fleeting presence, like a strange wind. Julia would take him out, teach him to play the banjo, talk to him about Elvis, and laugh loudly at everything Mimi disapproved of. She was the rare spark of color in John's black and white childhood, and that light would go out suddenly, forever. In 1958, when John was 17, Julia was struck and killed by a drunk off-duty policeman, right outside a relative's house. No goodbyes, no apologies, no explanation as to why. From that moment, a part of John's soul shut down. He rarely spoke of her in later years, but he wrote about her often in Julia, Mother, and My Mummy's Dead, songs haunted by scars that never healed. The boy who once craved affection now learned to survive through rebellion. At school, John began defying teachers, writing mocking poems and sketching crude cartoons. At Liverpool College of Art, he didn't stand out for his talent, but for his defiance. Music and satire became his first weapons to shield himself from the world. There was no golden childhood, no father to teach him how to be a man, no mother to teach him how to love. All John Lennon had was a quiet ache no one acknowledged, and a guitar strummed in a cold bedroom, his silent way of staying whole. And from that very ache, the artist named Lennon was born, not to tell fairy tales, but to scream the truths no one else dared to face. Early career. In 1956, John Lennon, a skinny, rebellious teenager burdened by a loneliness he had never dared to name, formed a band called the Quarrymen, as if to defy the cold strictness of Aunt Mimi and a world that constantly judged him. Every time he strummed his guitar, it was his way of saying, "I will not be forgotten." A year later, at a Quarrymen gig at St. Peter's Church, a 15-year-old boy named Paul McCartney asked if he could play a song. John saw something in Paul: precision, sensitivity, and an extraordinary musical instinct. They were complete opposites, but complemented each other perfectly. A week later, Paul joined the group. Then came George Harrison, younger, quieter, and eventually Ringo Starr would complete the lineup as drummer, though only when they turned professional. Before that, the band endured grueling years in Hamburg, Germany, performing for 7 hours straight each night in dingy clubs. They slept on floors, took amphetamines to stay awake, and played music as if tomorrow might not come. During that time, John's close friend Stuart Sutcliffe left the band to pursue art, and later died from a brain hemorrhage. It was John's first lesson in a hard truth. Music couldn't protect you from everything, but Hamburg shaped the Beatles, made them tougher, tighter, and unmistakably different. When they returned to Liverpool, they were no longer just boys playing for fun. They were a force ready to shake any stage. They renamed themselves the Beatles, a clever twist on Beatles and a nod to the beat, a subtle declaration of a new musical era. In 1962, they signed with Parlophone under producer George Martin. Their debut single, Love Me Do, wasn't an instant hit, but it marked the first step toward reshaping the entire landscape of popular music. John remained the band's early leader, the main songwriter, the voice with the raw rasp of instinct, the one who didn't care to play by the rules. While Paul crafted melodic beauty, George sought spiritual depth, and Ringo anchored them with steady rhythm. John was the edge, the rebellious element the British music scene had never heard before. He didn't just want fame, he wanted music to be an escape, a place where kids who lost their mothers or felt abandoned could scream and finally be heard. In those early days, the Beatles weren't yet a phenomenon, but they had one thing no other band had: John Lennon, the boy who strummed to fill the void the world had left behind. And that's when history started to pay attention. Career success. From 1963 to 1970, the Beatles weren't just the most famous band in the world. They were a cultural force that shaped an entire generation. And at the heart of that whirlwind, John Lennon was no longer the rebellious boy from Liverpool, but one of the most influential voices of the 20th century. After Love Me Do, a string of hits like Please Please Me, She Loves You, and I Want to Hold Your Hand quickly launched the Beatles beyond Britain. In 1964, they arrived in America amidst the hysteria of Beatlemania. Their appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, watched by over 73 million people, didn't just bring British music to the US, it marked the beginning of pop music's globalization. The Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership dominated the charts. While Paul pursued romantic melodies, John began pushing music into darker corners of the psyche. Help, 1965, was a genuine cry for help from someone spiraling. Norwegian Wood and Nowhere Man revealed a more introspective, haunted Lennon. In 1966, John sparked outrage when he claimed, "The Beatles are more popular than Jesus now." The backlash was immediate. American radio stations banned their music. Fans burned records. Lennon was forced to apologize. But the controversy exposed the first cracks between his public image and private identity. Around the same time, John began experimenting with LSD and delving into spiritual exploration. Strawberry Fields Forever, 1967, was the result, a surreal, disoriented ballad rooted in childhood grief. This was no longer easy listening pop. It was emotion turned into sound. Then came Yoko Ono, and everything changed. John was captivated by her and brought her into his creative space. This unsettled the rest of the band. Yoko was not just his lover, she was, in his words, the only one who understood me. The fractures widened. George wanted more songwriting space, Ringo grew tired, and Paul became increasingly controlling. The group's final albums, like The White Album and Let It Be, reflected this unraveling. John drifted from Paul. The two clashed openly through songs and interviews. In 1970, the Beatles officially disbanded. There was no graceful farewell, just the abrupt end of an era. In under 8 years, the Beatles released 13 albums, over 200 songs, and shattered every boundary in popular music. They weren't just a band, they were the voice of a generation unafraid to question, to rebel. And John Lennon, with all his chaos, pain, and longing for freedom, etched himself into history as the group's boldest soul. When the band broke up, fans were devastated. But for John, it was time to face his greatest challenge yet, creating alone, without the shelter of his bandmates. And it was in that raw vulnerability that his solo career began, more personal, more jagged, and with no one left to buffer the pain. Solo career. After the Beatles disbanded in 1970, John Lennon began a musical journey that was no longer collective, but deeply personal, raw, unfiltered, and filled with shadows. His first solo album, John Lennon, Plastic Ono Band, 1970, shocked listeners with its emotional nakedness. Songs like Mother and Working Class Hero didn't sugarcoat. They spoke plainly of childhood trauma, loss, and repressed rage. The music was stripped down, the lyrics blunt. John wasn't trying to please anyone. He just wanted to be real. A year later, Imagine, 1971, brought him back to the public in a gentler way. The title track quickly became a global peace anthem, though Lennon himself admitted he didn't always live up to the ideals it preached. Imagine was both a dream and a challenge to society. In the early 1970s, Lennon dove headfirst into politics. With some time in New York City, 1972, he tackled feminism, racial inequality, war, and the justice system. The album was heavily criticized for its blunt lyrics and overt political messaging. Still, John didn't back down, and the U.S. government took notice. The FBI opened a file on him, and President Nixon attempted to have him deported. It took years of legal battles for John to keep his green card. In 1973, his marriage to Yoko Ono hit a breaking point. John entered what he called his lost weekend, an 18-month period of separation during which he had a relationship with assistant May Pang, lived recklessly, and made frequent tabloid headlines. Even so, he released Walls and Bridges, 1974, which included Whatever Gets You Through the Night, his only solo #1 hit in the US during his lifetime. In 1975, he reconciled with Yoko and made the unexpected decision to retreat from music to raise their son, Sean. For 5 years, John lived quietly in New York, releasing no new material and avoiding the spotlight entirely. He called himself a house husband and kept a low profile. In 1980, John returned with Double Fantasy, a collection of songs about love, family, and hope. It marked a more mature, gentler Lennon, seemingly ready to begin a new chapter. But just weeks after the album's release, he was shot and killed outside his home. John Lennon's solo career lasted only a decade, with a modest number of albums. Yet the impact was profound. From anger to tenderness, From political defiance to intimate reflections, he used music like a diary, imperfect but honest. And it's that honesty that keeps people listening to him even now. Crises and the Dark Side. John Lennon was never a flawless icon. Beneath the spotlight, he was a complex man, full of contradictions and darkness. And it's precisely those qualities that have made him both admired and debated for decades. In a rare and brutally honest interview, Lennon once confessed, "I used to be cruel to my woman. I hit women. I was a hitter. I couldn't express myself." He offered no excuses. He spoke openly about his jealousy, his controlling behavior, and a tendency toward violence rooted in a chaotic childhood. The admission shocked many, but also revealed a man unafraid to confront his deepest failings. In the 1960s, Lennon sank deep into drug use, from marijuana and LSD to heroin. In 1968, he and Yoko Ono were arrested by British police for cannabis possession at their London apartment. Though released on bail, the arrest left a stain on his immigration record, which would haunt him for years and nearly lead to his deportation from the United States. His family life was equally contentious. With his eldest son, Julian, from his first marriage to Cynthia, Lennon was largely absent during the boy's formative years. In contrast, with Sean, his son with Yoko, John devoted his final 5 years to hands-on parenting. The contrast became symbolic. 2 children, 2 worlds. Julian has publicly expressed the pain of feeling like the forgotten son. Lennon's relationship with Yoko Ono has long been a lightning rod for criticism. She was often blamed for breaking up the Beatles or being overly controlling, but the reality was more nuanced. Yoko helped John through heroin withdrawal, supported his sobriety, encouraged him to embrace fatherhood, and stood by his decision to step away from fame. They weren't an easy couple to understand, but they were each other's anchor for many years. During their time apart, Lennon had a relationship with May Pang, his personal assistant, suggested by Yoko herself. This lost weekend period saw John partying heavily, living more freely, and even contemplating marriage with May. He described it later as one of the happiest times of his life. But when Yoko called, just once, John returned without hesitation. He later said the decision was not entirely rational, but necessary. Even in music, Lennon was unapologetically confrontational. After the Beatles split, he and Paul McCartney traded barbs through song. Paul's Too Many People included subtle jabs at John and Yoko. Lennon fired back with How Do You Sleep, laced with biting lines, The only thing you done was yesterday. These conflicts, breakups, and raw truths didn't diminish John Lennon in the public eye. On the contrary, they made him feel more real, more human. He didn't run from his wounds. He turned them into enduring music. It's those very shadows that made Lennon not just a legend, but a fiercely debated, irreplaceable symbol. Death and the mysteries behind. On the night of December 8, 1980, John Lennon and Yoko Ono returned to their apartment at the Dakota Building in New York after a recording session at Record Plant Studio. Just a few hours earlier, as they had left the building, Lennon had stopped to sign an autograph for a man waiting by the gate, Mark David Chapman. Chapman handed him a copy of Double Fantasy and bowed in thanks. No one thought anything of it. A photographer present captured that exact moment. John smiling as he signed, Chapman staring intently, a photo that would unintentionally immortalize the last time Lennon stood alive, right next to his killer. At around 10:50 p.m., the couple returned home. Chapman was still there. As Lennon stepped into the entranceway, Chapman emerged from the shadows and softly called, "Mr. Lennon?" John turned. He had no chance to react. 5 shots from a .38 caliber revolver rang out. 4 bullets tore into his back, piercing his lungs and aorta. He collapsed in the lobby, blood pooling across the cold stone floor. Police arrived within minutes. Without waiting for an ambulance, 2 officers lifted Lennon into their patrol car and sped to Roosevelt Hospital. He didn't speak a word. One officer recalled, He was breathing, but he wasn't there anymore. At the hospital, doctors tried to resuscitate him, but John Lennon was pronounced dead at 11:07 p.m. He was 40 years old, taken just as he was preparing his comeback with Double Fantasy, an album filled with love, hope, and a vision for a quieter chapter of life. Chapman did not flee. When officers arrived, he stood silently, holding a copy of The Catcher in the Rye. He was arrested without resistance. When asked why he did it, he replied simply, "I wanted to steal his fame." In his warped mind, Chapman believed that killing Lennon would make him part of history. A former fan, he felt betrayed by lyrics in Imagine, particularly Imagine No Possessions, while Lennon lived in wealth and fame. That contradiction between ideals and reality drove him to murder. Lennon's death shocked the world. There was no public funeral, no burial. At Yoko Ono's request, John's body was cremated, and the ashes kept private. John hated all forms of fake ceremony, she explained. On December 14, 1980, as Yoko requested, hundreds of thousands gathered in Central Park and across the globe for a 10-minute silent tribute. No music, no speeches, just a collective stillness never before seen in pop culture history. A year later, the Strawberry Fields Memorial was created in Central Park, directly across from the Dakota. There is no statue, no gravestone, just a white marble mosaic circle with a single word: Imagine. One word summing up the dream Lennon devoted his life to, and a silent prayer for a world he believed could be better, if only we listened. Mark David Chapman was sentenced to life in prison. He has applied for parole more than 10 times, always denied. Yoko Ono, along with millions of fans, continues to oppose any release. For them, Lennon's death is not just a personal loss. It's a fracture in modern cultural consciousness that cannot be repaired. John Lennon didn't die of an accident, illness, or war. He died from hatred, from someone who once admired him. It's the greatest irony of his life. The man who wrote Imagine About Peace was gunned down by violence at his own doorstep. That's why his death isn't just tragic. It's symbolic. A reminder that no matter how beautiful an ideal may be, it remains fragile in a fractured world. A dreamer fell that night, but his dream lives on. In every lyric, every candle lit at Strawberry Fields, and in the silence humanity still keeps for him more than 40 years later. Personal life. John Lennon once openly admitted that he was not a good man when it came to love. His first marriage to Cynthia Powell began in 1962, shortly after she became pregnant. They married in haste and lived together during the early explosion of the Beatles' fame. But within a few years, the relationship fractured. Lennon was frequently absent, engaged in multiple affairs, and showed little emotional warmth. He also admitted to being violent toward his wife, a truth he did not try to conceal later in life. They had one son, Julian Lennon. After the divorce, John had minimal contact with him for years. Julian grew up feeling abandoned and maintained a distant relationship with his father. He once said candidly that he loved Lennon's music, but wasn't sure he could love the man himself. With Sean Lennon, his son with Yoko Ono, things were different. After Sean's birth in 1975, John withdrew from music entirely, staying home to care for his son, cooking meals, taking him on outings, and living fully as a stay-at-home father. It was his effort to rewrite the role of dad, one he had failed at with Julian. His relationship with Yoko Ono was endlessly controversial. Many blamed her for splitting up the Beatles or manipulating Lennon, but in truth, Yoko helped him overcome addiction, encouraged him to step back from fame, and guided him toward a quieter, more grounded life. John often said he couldn't live without her. They were creatively and emotionally inseparable, making music together, rarely apart. Yet from 1973 to 1975, the couple did separate. During this period, John lived with May Pang, his assistant, arranged by Yoko herself. He moved to Los Angeles, partied heavily, drank often, but also began writing music again and reconnected with Julian. He even considered marrying May. But when Yoko called, just once, John returned to New York immediately. Sean was born not long after. Lennon never hid the conflicts in his personal life. He knew he had caused pain, made mistakes, and failed people. But rather than deny it, he spoke about it, wrote it into his lyrics, and tried to make amends. In his final years, he lived simply and privately, devoting himself to his family. No tours, no interviews, no scandals, just a man trying at last to be a better human being. Legacy and influence. John Lennon wasn't just a member of the Beatles. He was a central force behind some of the most transformative shifts in music, thought, and society in the 20th century. From his lifetime to long after his death, his name has remained synonymous with two words: influence and controversy. As co-founder of the Beatles, Lennon helped ignite a global cultural revolution in the 1960s. He didn't just write songs, he reshaped how pop music could reflect life. Tracks like Help, Strawberry Fields Forever, All You Need Is Love, and Imagine weren't merely hits. They embodied the crises, questions, and hopes of an entire generation. Imagine is still widely considered the unofficial anthem of the global peace movement. After leaving the Beatles, Lennon's solo work revealed more of his true self, riddled with insecurity, introspection, and a constant clash between idealism and reality. He dared to write songs that challenged religion, God, exposed raw personal pain, mother, and demanded peace. Give peace a chance. Not every track was beloved, but each reflected an artist unwilling to compromise, even with himself. Beyond music, Lennon became a symbol of resistance. He was surveilled by the FBI for his anti-war activism and faced real threats of deportation from the US. In an era when most artists avoided politics, Lennon chose the front line, organizing campaigns like the Bed-In for Peace with Yoko Ono, and writing letters demanding an end to the Vietnam War. Though seen as dangerous by authorities, he became the voice of a generation that needed someone to say what no one else dared. Lennon's impact didn't stop at art or politics. His image, round glasses, long hair, khaki shirt, became a cross-generational pop culture icon. He influenced countless artists, from David Bowie and U2 to Radiohead and Oasis. Many singers, poets, filmmakers, and activists still cite him as a source of inspiration. In 1987, his hometown of Liverpool opened The Beatles Story, the first official museum dedicated to the band. Numerous memorials to Lennon have appeared worldwide, from the Imagine Peace Tower in Iceland, built by Yoko Ono, to the Strawberry Fields Memorial in Central Park, where fans still gather every year on the anniversary of his death. John Lennon wasn't just a musician, he was a movement. And decades later, his voice still echoes wherever people dare to dream, to question, and to imagine. John Lennon didn't live as an icon. He lived as a human being, full of contradictions, full of flaws, and constantly trying to understand himself and change the world around him. From an abandoned boy in Liverpool to the heart of the Beatles, from the roar of millions to the silence after gunfire in New York, Lennon's journey was a turbulent spiral of glory and collapse. He once said, "Life is what happens while you're busy making other plans." And indeed, his life, unpredictable, experimental, often off course, left behind a legacy greater than any plan could have imagined. Lennon wasn't perfect. He abandoned family, battled addiction, lashed out at others, but he dared to admit it, to make amends, to live honestly, and to turn even his darkest moments into music, into messages, into something that helped millions of others find themselves. In an age when legends are often shaped to fit a mold, John Lennon reminded us that imperfection is what touches the heart most deeply, that a person can be both fragile and brave, both wrong and extraordinary, and that even though he no longer walks this earth, he still lives, in every lyric, every quote, every dream left unfinished. If you've ever listened to Imagine on a rainy night, ever felt lost while growing up, ever asked yourself, who am I in this world? Then perhaps a part of John Lennon is alive in you too. What do you think Lennon's greatest legacy is? His music, his message, or his humanity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel as we continue exploring the lives of those who changed the course of an entire century.